Hey, this is Cave Cat again, and again I welcome you to another great episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. It's time once again to review another feature-length film, but for this one, it's time for us to go back to 1994 once again, the second time since I reviewed The Lion King back in episode 18. The film I'm reviewing is so touching and influential that when it was first released, it received a lot of critical acclaim, even winning 6 Academy Awards and getting several award nominations. That's right, it's Forrest Gump. Released in theaters on July 6, 1994, the film was an adaptation of a book of the same name written by a guy named Winston Groom and was directed by Robert Zemeckis. You know, the guy who directed the Back to the Future films, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and even the fantasy comedy film Death Becomes Her. But anyway, it's time to talk about the film itself, which starred Tom Hanks, aka the voice of Woody in the Toy Story films, which I previously did a review on, as the titular character. The film tells the story of the title character Forrest Gump, a young man in the early 1980s who tells his life story to some passing people while at a bus stop in Georgia. So basically, the rest of the film is a recap of Forrest's life from when he was a boy back in the early 1950s and began growing up in the 60s and the 70s. During these years, Forrest ends up having to face various hardships throughout his life, such as having to wear braces on his legs due to seemingly being crippled, being bullied relentlessly because of his mental prowess, and even enduring a lot of people putting him down because of these problems. But even in spite of these shortcomings, you can't help but root for Forrest when he manages to find a way to overcome the problems that he has. One good example of this is when he is bullied and pushed relentlessly by a group of bullies who try to run him down with their bicycles, and despite being told by his best friend Jenny to "Run, Forrest, run!" he starts off pretty slow at running at first, thanks to his braces. But as he starts to speed up, the braces soon fall apart, which gives him a chance to actually outrun his oppressors while also overcoming the crippledness that he supposedly had. And this is just one among many awesome feats that Forrest is able to accomplish all throughout the film. Among the things that we've seen Forrest do in his adult years, we've seen him meet with President Kennedy, give John Lennon the inspiration to write the song Imagine, help expose the scandal of Watergate, and many others. Heck, even back when he was a boy and still wearing his braces, he actually inspired Elvis Presley to incorporate his iconic hip-swinging moves into his music career. This is just the tip of the iceberg, by the way. The film has a pretty good mix of action, heart, comedy, and tear-jerking moments, all while still doing its part to stay true to the book that it's based on, for the most part. Now, I've never read the book, but from what I heard of it, some of the characters in the book are portrayed rather differently than how the film portrays them. For example, in the book, Forrest was pretty crass and rather foul-mouthed, compared to the film where he is more innocent, polite, and rather simple. Maybe it is for the best that the filmmakers changed these aspects of Forrest's character around for the film, so that he wouldn't come across as being boorish and unlikable to the audience. I also recall that a similar case was used with 1993's Mrs. Doubtfire, which itself was also based on a book, albeit written by an English woman by the name of Anne Fine. From what I recall in the original book version, the main character dressed up as a nanny not only to try and be with his kids, but also to use them for his nefarious deeds and to also get his ex-wife into trouble. Like with the film version of Forrest Gump, I'm glad that the film version of Mrs. Doubtfire completely omits these unfavorable character traits of Daniel Hillard and made him come across more as being sympathetic and desperate. But back to Forrest Gump. Both the book and the film really do a great job of telling a story from the perspective of a mentally challenged young man as he goes through life seeing things with a limited understanding of how the world works. I love how the film makes many excellent uses of what TV tropes refers to as been-there-shaped history, where a fictional character either takes part in or is responsible for a real-life event, or even the creation of an iconic event or style, such as when he inspires Elvis's jerky hip movements, as I've mentioned earlier. However, while I do like the film, there's actually one thing about it that I'm not really too keen on. This film actually contains quite a bit of swearing in it, even including one use of the dreaded F-bomb during Forrest's time that he spent with the activist Abby Hoffman. It's this little issue that slightly detracts from the film, but once you get past all of that, the rest of the film isn't really all that bad. There's also a bunch of great quotes in this film too, such as, "Mama always said life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're gonna get," which is one of the most famously quoted lines of the entire movie. There's also the bit where after Forrest is drafted into the army and gets drilled by a strict and overbearing drill sergeant, when the drill sergeant asks the new recruits if he's clear, all of them, including Forrest, answer with, "Yes, drill sergeant!" Not to mention, after Forrest reunites with his commanding superior, Lieutenant Dan, who lost his legs in war, and notices that Lieutenant Dan now has prosthetic legs, Forrest tells him, "Lieutenant Dan, you got new legs." It just sounded so innocent combined with Forrest's mentality that it really makes it sound all the more authentic. Also, aside from Tom Hanks as Forrest Gump, the rest of the cast members also do a good job with the roles that they were given. Like Robin Wright as Jenny, Sally Field as Forrest's mother, and especially Gary Sinise as Lieutenant Dan. Excuse me. Not only does Gary steal the show when playing Lieutenant Dan, but he also plays the character with a rather serious and somber atmosphere, especially considering the fact that he ended up losing his legs in the Vietnam War before Forrest saved him from certain death. You gotta give Robert Zemeckis praise for his direction of the film, especially after he directed Back to the Future, Roger Rabbit, and several others. And even though he would later go on to direct other films like Contact, Castaway, The Polar Express, and especially the 2022 remake of Disney's Pinocchio, he still gave it his all with this film, and a lot of people really liked this film for the plot, the characters, and even the cinematography. Sure, it did have to compete against other films that were released at the time, like The Lion King, Angels in the Outfield, The Little Rascals, and several others, but that didn't stop it from becoming one of the biggest box office hits in 1994, along with The Lion King. Critics and audiences all agree that Forrest Gump was one of the best films to have been released in 1994, and I certainly agree with that. So it's because of this that I will give the film 8 stars. A year after the film version of Forrest Gump was released at theaters, Winston Groom actually wrote and published a sequel to the original book called Gump and Company, which is more based on the film version, since it portrayed Forrest more how he was depicted in the film rather than the original book, and I'm glad that that happened. However, unlike with the original book, the sequel never got a film adaptation, despite the fact that they did try to make a film based on Gump and Company, only for the film to end up going into development hell in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. I can definitely see why the filmmakers would decide to not pursue the project, especially in the wake of 9/11, but all that is just water through the gate now. And there had been talk of a film version of Gump and Company back in 2007, and also a couple of years back in 2022, but still, nothing really came of that. Even in spite of all this, Forrest Gump still remains one of the greatest movies ever made, even spawning a lot of references in different forms of pop culture. That just shows how much of an impact the film has made on cinema back then. No question about it. Well, with all that's been said, that does it for this episode of Cave Cat's movie and TV reviews. Like I keep saying before, be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more episodes or other videos that'll come your way. So until next time, later!